Thank you very much for joining us today at the latest Brum Architecture Resilience event. My name is Colin Nolan and I'm from the Birmingham Architectural Association, and I'm going to introduce tonight's host, Gensler Design Director Phil Twiss, and our special guest speaker, David Hunter, Chairman of Treglown. This is your first time at a BAA event. We were founded in 1874 and we relaunched 3 years ago. We're represented by architects, architectural technologists, interior designers, engineers, and many more professionals from the built environments. We have an interest in architecture, and we are run by a community from a variety of practices based in the city. Our aim is to promote, support, and share knowledge through our community. The BAA is supported by a number of partners and sponsors, and it's thanks to these organisations that we're able to deliver such a huge programme of events and activities all year round. I'd just like to say thank you to Alamure, Ibstock, Marley, Delta Light, FRA, All Good, Taylor Maxwell, Milliken, Kitchen Gallery, Altro, and Rainers. We are really lucky to have such great supporters, and it's because of our Brum Architecture supporters that we're able to continue to deliver such a varied programme of events and donate thousands to the Architects Benevolent Society. I'm going to hand over now to Phil Twiss, who's going to tell us more about tonight's special guest speaker, David Hunter. Hi, Phil.
Connor, thank you very much. Good evening. And David, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Just to give you a quick introduction to David. David, having been with Treglown since 1987, and he's worked there as an architect across a wide range of projects. He's now the chairman and actually has led Treglown's employee ownership journey, having established the practice as a place where people want to carve their careers. David proudly puts people and the culture of the practice at the heart of his approach. His focus on health, well-being and flexible working led Treglown to become the first UK business to receive an excellent rating across all aspects of the Workplace Wellbeing Charter. Pre-pandemic, Treglown had started to put in place several business change projects to improve working environments, including increasing efficiencies and build everyday resilience. The most notable achievement being the creation of a reliable, scalable home working system, as well as an agile and flexible working policy. Both investments have ultimately allowed the practice to weather the COVID storm. In a world of political, economic and social flux, David believes it's important now more than ever to innovate and invest in the future. Working on the basis that you should never waste a good crisis, what lies ahead for Treglown? David, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to join such a distinguished lineup of contributors. It's great to be here. So, if I may, I'll just quickly start sharing a screen with you. Let's see if I can find the one. There, we may need to run back just a moment to get to the right slides. Here we go, and start there. Okay, good. So, look, in answering this exam question, really, I figured that there would be two parts to this, addressing primarily resilience for us all. I wanted perhaps to look briefly at the effect of COVID on running our practice, and then the forward view that we have. But first of all, I thought it'd be helpful to provide a bit of context for those of you that maybe aren't fully aware of Treglown. I have been with the practice a very long time, but actually it was founded in Bristol in 1953. And we've gradually grown. We're up to about 330 of us now, which is a reasonable size. And as we've grown, we've geographically spread out. We opened offices in London and Plymouth, having started in Bristol. Our headquarters are still in Bristol, and then gradually we've moved to other locations, primarily in the south of England and Wales, but we are gradually moving further north as well. And our most recent addition has been an office in Birmingham. We were lucky enough to be able to take on the Bourneville architects, which have a rich tradition in Brum, we know, and we worked very closely with them to make sure that they were going to be a good cultural fit with us. As Phil mentioned, we are an employee-owned company, and I think that that is something which, over the last few years, we're now into the 6th or 7th year, I think, of that operating. That has actually become something which I believe is really pretty important to the culture of our business. And unusually, perhaps for an architectural practice, we are a directly owned organization. So employees can just buy shares in the company the same as directors would. And that actually, in the context of this particular talk, I think what it has done, having a direct ownership model, is I think it's changed the way that we've managed our business. It feels that we are actually much more mindful of being open and transparent about the way that we manage our business. And that has generated, I would like to think, a good deal of reciprocal trust between employees and managers. And I think that's great at any time, but particularly when times get tough, having that trust there is very valuable. As you might imagine, for a business of our size, we're active in quite a number of sectors, pretty much all sectors, I think, really. As I suspect a lot of members on the call are seeing, there is quite a lot of schools work. We are doing a lot of healthcare work, but equally, we are still seeing a good number of inquiries in all kinds of other areas, including residential and actually quite a lot of workplace work as well, offices and workplaces. And as we've gradually grown, I think it's fair to say that we're not just architects. We've and again, similar to sizable practices, we have expanded our expertise so that we have other experts to bring in: town planners, historic and building conservation people, interior designers, landscape architects, and so on. It's a good range. We do shy away from getting involved with engineering at the moment so far, but all of those complementary skills and disciplines, I think, tend to add to our kind of core business, which remains architecture. So, in a sense, I think, in summary, we are a fairly well-established, broadly based organization that is planning through employee ownership to be around for the long term. And in normal circumstances, I think that is a reasonable basis for having a good, resilient business. But perhaps it would be useful to just look at the effect of COVID on running our practice and the impact that it's had in the last 6 months or so. And I think actually there's it feels like we've developed a bit of track record. If you take a slightly longer view back, thinking here that we've achieved a degree of match fitness in dealing with the unexpected. There's this fantastic statistic, I don't know how true it is, but I believe it, that if you'd put a £10 bet, accumulator bet, in 2016 on the UK leaving the European Union, on Donald Trump becoming president of the United States and Leicester City Football Club winning the Premiership, your £10 initial stake would have turned into something, I think, like £15 million payout. I mean, it was an extraordinary time looking back on it. And it sort of has stood us instead for having to deal with really the unexpected. And it feels like it has been quite a tough build-up to this point. And I think, I sense, and I suspect many others have as well, that a key to surviving all of that build-up has been developing a degree of resilience and flexibility, and failure to be flexible, I think, can clearly have catastrophic impact as you go forwards. So, but maybe I think there's a feeling that the COVID pandemic, it actually feels like it's something different. Somebody I was talking to in another area of business a couple of weeks ago was saying that it was their thought that actually the financial crash in 2008, 2010 was laid firmly at the feet of companies' finance directors, whereas the pandemic this time around seems to have landed firmly at the feet of HR directors, and I think that's probably quite an insightful sort of a thing. This is something which absolutely applies and affects all of us. And I think on reflection over the last 6 months or so, it feels like there are definitely been some pitfalls and some strains, but there are equally some positives that have genuinely come out of this. I mean, in terms of the positives, the trust and transparency that I alluded to a moment ago, actually we did a survey towards the end of the lockdown, just to amongst staff to see how people were feeling, and there was an overwhelming response that about 98% of people felt that they were trusted and that they had trust in us. And I think that whole transparency thing and communicating effectively is crucial there. And it does go a long way to making people feel reassured. I think if we're in this for the long run, I think a lot of us have recognized that there is a sudden leap forwards in the flexibility and choice of how we work, where we work, over what timescales we work. And we have been trying hard to develop that flexibility. We were doing that before the pandemic struck, but it is something which again has taken a further leap forwards, and suddenly I think all kinds of additional options are available to us. We're certainly traveling less. I think at the last count, we were probably traveling about 75% less on business and commuting over the last 6 months than we were previously. And that can only really, I think, be a good thing in as much as we still manage to communicate and connect with one another. There is more communication. Again, it was an unexpected positive. I thought from that initial survey that we did, that people were saying actually they felt more connected with the rest of our business, bearing in mind that we operate over 9 separate locations in the UK. They felt that they were more part of the whole because we were paying more attention to how we communicated with everybody. And another unexpected positive, I think, was the fact that we appear to be able to share more across studios. We've never really been a profit-centered organization, but even still, we are now able to, about a quarter of people are working on projects that aren't necessarily directly based in their studios. We're sharing work around, we're managing to fill the gaps and make sure the resource is being deployed as effectively as we can. So there are some real positives that we've seen from the pandemic so far. However, I think it does feel like we're potentially all entering a second phase. Our Cardiff office is going to be annexed, I think, in the next few days, and people aren't going to be able to work in that studio at all. I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact of shortening days and worsening weather on the general mood of our teams. And so we feel that actually there is a need for us to concentrate in the coming months on those potential hazards and pitfalls that lie ahead. Certainly in terms of continual uncertainty, and that will be a feature, I think, of the coming months. Making renewed efforts to make sure that continual communication is effective is shared around. I think that will be key. In terms of addressing isolation and stress, I think team support in whatever form it can be is going to also need particular attention. We are getting to the point where staff are being able to reoccupy under controlled conditions our studios, and I think thinking very carefully about how we occupy and who is there and how that time is spent. It's valuable time together. We need to make sure that we make the most of that. And also, it feels like we're in this potentially for the long haul, and so the visibility of staff and the progression of people's careers needs to be thought about carefully. Over recent years, we have actually become consciously more relaxed about how we review staff progress and so on. relying on it being a less formalized solution. And I think we may have to review that again and go back to something which does actually make sure that we are not missing anybody, nobody's falling through the cracks, and also get better at setting career paths and goals for individuals. And allied with that, I think the challenge of learning and mentoring, there is really no substitute for the sort of osmotic process of sitting in a studio and hearing what's going on around one. So sharing best practice and team working patterns to optimize that is, I think, going to be important. In fact, we have just in the last couple of weeks appointed a learning and development advisor for the first time, somebody who's going to be able to help us to get ourselves better organized with the whole learning material, producing prospectuses of how we go about teaching and training and learning and all of those sorts of things. So I believe there is another focus for us there. So in a sense, that is just a very brief kind of overview of how it feels that COVID has impacted on the running of our practice. In terms of our forward view, well, there's no shortage of views about what impact COVID is having, and it's, you know, there are masses and masses of reference points. I chose to pick out this one from Gallagher's, who are a risk management and management consultancy, and they'd identified these 4 mega trends that they figure have had a resounding impact right the way across society and organizations and individuals. Clearly, the economy is of huge concern. I think that the leap forward in digital transformation is profound and massively important. But actually, I think that it's in the area of those latter two, the search for a sense of purpose and eco-friendly agendas that sort of resonate particularly with some of the thoughts that we as a practice have been having. And I suspect a number of you on the call will also recognize. And in a sense, I think it's really, and it feels like it's an opportunity for long-held ideas to become mainstream. My daughter came to live with us for, she's at university. She came back during lockdown, and she managed to find this quote from somewhere. I don't know where it is, but she said, look, lockdown is, she said, Mother Nature's way of telling us to go to our rooms and think about how we've been behaving. And actually, there is something about that kind of opportunity for a period of reflective thought, which I suspect might make a difference. I really hope might make a difference to how people approach both the sense of purpose and the environmental agenda. So maybe it is that those long-held ideas that many of us have had over recent years are becoming mainstream at last in terms of designing for low and zero carbon and all of those other things that I've noted there, resilient communities and so on. It is a sense of some bewilderment, I think, and frustration to an extent that we, for example, we designed, this is an image of our office in Cardiff, which is certified zero carbon. We designed it and had it built 10 years ago and have been occupying it ever since. And it works really beautifully. It has been providing electric power back into the grid for over those 10 years. And there's something, I don't quite know why it is that these things haven't picked up yet. Maybe the time has come for this to genuinely now become a possibility and a mainstream thing. The technology is there, the knowledge is there. We absolutely could and should be pushing forwards with these things. We must do, of course, mustn't we? And then the question of designing for resilient communities. Again, the principle of subjugating the car and designing spaces around residential estates for the use of people rather than vehicles. This is an image of paintworks that we just completed a couple of years ago in Bristol. And there's a note there. This is a newly formed community that is clearly operating in a really resilient way in pulling together, going the extra mile to support local businesses and so on. This this must, at least in some part, I think, be influenced by the quality of the environment that is being provided, and the design solutions that are being adopted. And of course, that's nothing new, as you will well know. In Birmingham, the whole area of Bourneville and the legacy there is massively important. And I think that the time again is coming for carefully thought through productive landscapes, generous landscaping, and lots of green space, but also a degree of stewardship of estates and so on. And I think there are some very interesting debates to be had there about how that might progress or re-emerge into the as we develop. These are some of the ideas that we have recently been thinking about in quite a bit more detail. This is actually an image from our IBA entry for the Letchworth Garden Village. We were shortlisted. We didn't win, unfortunately, although we took some solace from the fact that we did achieve the public vote as their favourite. And some of the themes that we identified there seem pretty prescient, actually. This question of designing for people rather than cars, about having productive landscape, about even identifying small units within or areas within garden spaces that can be used flexibly. You know, this is the sort of thing that I suspect the impact of the pandemic will make people think again about. Maybe the time has come for that too. Of course, there is also the creative reuse and retrofit agenda as well, and increasing awareness of the value of reusing structures. This is actually an image of University of Reading Library, which we've just completed a long phased development, redevelopment, or refurbishment of the university library there. It was a marginal decision for the university as to whether they should demolish and start again, or keep the 1960s building, I think, that they had on campus. And in fact, the decision was made to reuse the structure, and in a phased way, we've just now completed the complete refurbishment of that. There has been saved an awful lot of embodied carbon in a massive concrete frame and foundations and so on. And we have designed, we have provided a real state of the art library facility, which has managed to continue operating throughout this time. So, you know, these things can be done and are very important. And then just finally, this image of a Nightingale ward that we worked on over the summer down in Exeter, the very rapid conversion of I think it was a home base unit in Exeter into a Nightingale ward. And I just actually making the point really there that when we absolutely have to, things can be done really quickly and very collaboratively and in a really positive way. And I think the lessons that we've learnt from doing that in this kind of context, I think augurs well for future collaborative work. And I think there's a whole area there that we need to explore as well. So I guess in summary, I feel like the view forwards, we should choose to be positive if we can. The zeitgeist, it feels like it is changing, and as was mentioned right at the start, you know, we shouldn't fail to take advantage of a crisis. We should never let it go to waste. So there you are. That's my view at the moment. That's what I have to offer. Thank you for listening.
Dave, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your journey, your brief look back over the growth and the creation of Stride, and also kind of a look forward to the future. It's very interesting to say that, as you say, from these crises, that there are opportunities to grow and look at the positives. I was do for everybody on the call, please use the chat and the Q&As to put any questions in that you have that you'd like to ask David. Any burning questions on Treglown's approach to sustainability or anything that David has said. A couple of things that I just perhaps wanted to kick off with, David. And very interesting. You said that your daughter said that the climate crisis is nature's way of telling us to go to our room. So if we are currently on the naughty step, how do we get off?
Well, there's a good question. How do we get off? I suppose it feels like there are things that we need to be mindful of and to hold the memory of as we have been going through this experience. I think, I hear a lot of people saying, actually during lockdown it was so much quieter, and the air quality was actually noticeably better. Remembering those sorts of feelings, being mindful to that these things are there, it can be done. It does need a conscious effort. I think perhaps trying to resist going back to old habits, I think, is possibly the thing. It is pretty depressing. I'm looking out here from my attic window, and I can see just as many cars, I think, heading back from work as I could previously, almost. And I think we have to grab those memories of how things were and potentially try and apply them. I don't know. That's
very interesting. With a number of questions starting just to come through, an interesting leading quite nicely into the journey into employee ownership. And I've got one just before. What led you to change to the employee ownership model? And was there some resistance at the start from the directors, from the other directors even?
Well, look, there were two or three big things, I think, coming up. So this was 6, 7, 8 years ago now. There were a number of senior directors in the practice who, between them, owned about 45% of the company, and they were all about to leave at the same time, retire at the same time, and so we knew that there was something coming up that we had to deal with, and we equally knew that we didn't want to make ourselves prone to either takeover or to loading up our debt profile to the point where it was becoming too much of a burden for us. So we needed to find a way of dealing with that sort of financial thing. And equally, I think all of us felt around the board table agreed that actually the great advantage of how we had been hitherto was that we were masters of our own destiny, and that was something that we absolutely wanted to hold on to into the future. So trying to find something which put our practice beyond the kind of the grasp of potentially somebody coming and wanting to take us over, or indeed for us to become too beholden to the banks in paying off those people leaving, sort of spawned the idea. I think it also felt like it was a good cultural fit with the way that we were gradually moving. So I think there was a feel amongst my fellow directors that we wanted to flatten the hierarchy, if you like, of the practice as well, and just make it, recognize that we have a fantastic bunch of professional people who are dedicated to the cause and are engaged with the business, and it was only right and fair that there should be this closer relationship with the amount of effort that they put in and the amount of long-term benefit that they could get out. And actually, the more that we thought about it, and the more that we looked at what our options were, I think the more advantages we started to see in developing this kind of this broadening of the ownership model.
Well, kind of moving on from that and the ownership model, one question that's come in anonymously, but just at what point can an employee buy shares? Do they actually need to be a certain level of seniority within the practice? Do they need to be a titled member of staff?
No, we've actually got a scheme which is HMRC approved. That actually the rules of the scheme are that absolutely everybody has to be able to buy shares. I think the only caveat is that I think you have to have been with the practice and completed your probationary period, which is a 6-month period. Mm. But beyond that, absolutely everyone has the opportunity to buy shares, and the scheme allows for a certain number of shares to be bought through your pre-tax income. So you have a greater buying capability in that respect, and if you do that, then we are allowed through the rules of the scheme as a business to give you shares as well, matching shares as well. So you can build up over a period of time a decent sort of a nest egg, in fact. And I think I'm right in saying about 70% of people in the business have elected to do that, and actually, of the remaining 30%, quite a significant proportion are kind of transient members of staff, students, and so on, who maybe don't necessarily see a longer term advantage in investing in us.
I mean, just staying on the employee ownership theme, have you seen benefits, and what are the benefits you've seen in terms of the staff moving to that model? As you say, 70% of the staff do have shares. Have you noticed a change in attitude and how people are working or engaging with the firm?
So I think it's quite difficult to split out, for example, how the economic performance of the business, the financial performance of the business has been affected. I would say that in the first 2 or 3 years that the scheme was in operation, we actually recorded higher profit levels and higher turnover levels. We've actually maintained those, broadly speaking, in subsequent years. So there was a bit of a leap forwards there. But actually, the most telling thing, I think, has been when times have got tougher, and we are having to say to people, look, this is going to be awkward now. We have to find a way through this together. And I think that sense of having been as open as we can be about the prospects, it has provided a much better dialogue, I believe, and therefore it's in those areas. We've then said, well, perhaps we need to ask for voluntary measures, for example. Are there things that people could do to help? And a remarkable amount of cooperation in that respect. People saying, look, I'm quite happy to consider reducing my hours voluntarily, or I've always wanted to go on a sabbatical. This is the time for me to do it. Is it okay if I do that? These sorts of things. So there are those kinds of. I think it feels like it's in those areas that actually we have derived the most tangible benefit.
So I've got another question. So there's a theme emerging about the attitude to projects and sustainability. I'll just come on to that in just one moment. Just before we move to that, another question from another anonymous attendee. Could you explain a little more about your personal journey and how you got to where you have?
Yes, I had, as I mentioned, I've been with the practice pretty much all of my working career, which I didn't plan necessarily. I think so. I arrived from university, and circumstances. I had the option to go and work in London, but family circumstances meant that I needed to come back to Bristol, and so I took this job with Strides, and actually I think fairly quickly recognised that there was an opportunity to carve a career, to forge a way through that would satisfy my ambition, I guess, in order to go and explore aspects of the profession, but also to take time. I took time to actually build a house for my mother over a couple of summers. I didn't do it on my own. There was actually a builder, and his nephew came as well, and we built this house. It was great, a fantastic, useful experience, and also a couple of other secondments and so on. But great, it's just a question of a fairly linear process of assembling and building one's experience. And I just felt that the business allowed me the flexibility to do that and to pursue things that that interested me, and that is something I strongly subscribed to, and it's the kind of context that now I find myself chairman and HR director. It's something that I feel should be the opportunity that others are given, and that degree of stability does have benefits. So I kept turning up, basically.
Yes. So always a good way, pays the mortgage if nothing else.
Yeah.
A couple of questions now, which I'm going to just lump together, actually. What benefits do you find by having so many services provided in-house? And then coupled with that, do your different offices have different specialities? Do they share the workload even before? COVID?
Okay, so in terms of the specialities, is it valuable to have so many? I honestly believe that it is, and I think that there is. I mean, it's actually these specialities I think are working on the kind of internal market of clients that we already have. So there is this sort of ability to cross sell within from one commission to another. So, and it has been a gradual thing. I think we've also, over the last 2 or 3 years, we've more consciously started to look at how we might even further diversify and look at other services or other areas of research and so on. And I think really the only parameters that we set are that they need to complement one another, and that this does actually sort of improve the service that we're able to offer to clients. In terms of sharing, yes, we've always tried to do that. And it's an increasing feature. I think one of the challenges that we do have, though, is this question of a sort of internal project teams and how they work, because it's kind of easy for somebody who is one of our in-house landscape architects or interior designers to be treated as sort of part of the family, and you don't treat them in the same way that you would somebody from outside the practice, and actually making sure that there is that kind of that mutual respect and team working arrangement going on is one of the things that we do need to pay attention to. So we need to make sure that the internal team structure is absolutely as robust as when others are brought from outside the business and third parties as well. It's actually quite an interesting challenge, but it is all based on the fact that we do need to share things around, and so there is the empire building thing just doesn't. We try and avoid that if we can.
And I following on from that in relation to having different skill sets and within offices, do you think from your perspective there are any sectors that you think might excel, or, and this will questions coming from one of the attendees, are there any sectors that you think might excel or grow post-pandemic and some that might shrink?
I think that there is going to be, I don't know, it feels to me like there could be quite a strong call for a different kind of a process for master planning and urban designing, and I think possibly some of that might be linked with the white paper and the changes that are going to come forwards there. This question of a different way of engaging with the public engagement and consultation and so on. So I think that might well be an area where there could be some change in emphasis. Specifically post-pandemic, I'm not sure. I think I mean I suspect there are going to be general economic challenges, and therefore the sort of infrastructure, social infrastructure, and government-funded projects, I think, are potentially going to be very important source of work for us and a number of us, I'm sure. I figure it's possibly difficult to be, there are so many variables, and it's so difficult to predict where these things are going to pop up. I thought, for example, I must admit that I thought that the impact of all of this on workplace and office design was, well, my initial thought was, and this is going to be a really challenged area. And I don't know about you, but we have found that there is actually really quite a considerable amount of that work still going on. People still thinking differently about how workplace is going to be provided, and therefore, actually, there's that could be a great opportunity, I think, for creative thought about how we get together to work.
And funny enough, that leads very nicely into another question from the audience, and talking about workplace and workplace changing. The question is, it's very nice to see how seriously you take the inhabitants' interviews, the people who inhabit the people in the space you create. In what ways do you do post-occupancy surveys and learn or improve from them?
So I'm conscious that we're actually, post-occupancy surveying is really we find quite a challenging area to do really effectively. And actually we did actually support a research project at University of West of England with an academic research exercise of post-occupancy evaluation through social media. And I think that is an area which we've started to sort of develop that thought stream into this business of actually developing or getting that post-occupancy feedback in novel and perhaps less formal forms, which is where that whole business of the inhabitant series that we've done has come from, and actually it sort of struck quite a rich goal. I mean, post-occupancy, it seems to me, a lot of it is the sort of formal measurement of how buildings work, and the engineering feedback and so on. Actually, from our point of view, it's the softer aspects of how people inhabit space and use it and adapt it is the thing that's of interest. And actually using those other techniques, alternative ways in to find out that information. We actually have Tom, our photographer, goes and photographs buildings, and he's great at just chatting with people. And so whilst they're having their photographs taken, we'd like to have pictures of people using our buildings. He has taken the opportunity to talk with them and find out a little bit more about it. And that's it tells you as much, I think, about how people are responding to the spaces that you thought were going to be used in one way and potentially are being used in a different way. So it's less, it's the word empirical. I think it's just more. It's that business of how people use our buildings in unexpected ways that I think is particularly valuable.
Thinking about how people use buildings, you mentioned in relation to the refurbishment of the University of Reading Library, that the decision by the university was marginal. I'm wondering what swayed it to do the refit rather than a demolition.
I would have to check. I have to say I wasn't intimately involved with the project myself, but my understanding was that there were a number of factors involved, and a number of, as you might imagine, with a scheme of that size and kind of integral importance to the university. I believe that they did a number of really detailed feasibilities about how and where alternatives could be provided on campus. And I think we had actually done a master planning exercise for White Knights campus in preceding years, so we kind of had a pretty good idea of what was there and what the alternatives were, and I think it was generally felt that the location of the library itself was pretty good in terms of it being in its kind of its contribution to the campus as a whole. And if you decided to move it somewhere else, there would be all kinds of other collateral complications that you'd have to take into account. So I believe that was actually a pretty strong determinant for that. But then obviously there has to be continuity of service as well. So you couldn't build a new one and then drop the old one and keep the whole thing going. If it could be a massively complicated exercise. So I think there was that element, and then there was also the question of the quality of the fabric itself, which I believe was apart from the primary structure, I believe that the rest of it was pretty life expired, and so there had to be a pretty thoroughgoing refit.
There's a couple of good questions coming in, just looking towards the future, which I'll come on to in just a second. But just one more question, just kind of picking up on the reuse and the sustainability approach. Your own office, Treglown Court, as you said, is a zero carbon office and now 10 years old. What do you see as the challenges for us going forward to actually take those two, adapt those into the mainstream? Is it in terms of scalability, energy in use, energy in construction? Are there some thoughts that you have around that to bring it more perhaps to the mainstream? What do we need to do as architects?
I think I might have mentioned I'm slightly perplexed as to why it hasn't gained more traction more quickly. Maybe it is this question of scalability, and actually potentially perhaps, I mean, 10 years ago, achieving zero carbon certification, I suspect, is very different to what it is now. And you know, this is a massively more sophisticated market that we're now operating in. And maybe it's the perceived complexities of achieving the kinds of levels of low and zero carbon operation, and the various other categories that there are of this that is still providing a never increasing hurdle. I was asked to do a brief talk to an innovation conference for the CBI last year, and sort of posed this question to the CBI as a group there, asking them, not broadly speaking, non-construction industry people and runners of business more generally, and their preoccupation is certainly with it seems is with energy consumption and energy efficiency, not necessarily looking at the broader sense of sustainability as a whole. And I think I can only think that it is a question of inertia and attitude. And I do wonder whether this kind of this break in or this sort of enhanced perception that we now have of the value of our surroundings and so on, whether that actually will just nudge us, along with all the other pressures that are there, nudge us into the point where people say, oh, okay, I get it, this can be done. I'm afraid I can't offer any more insightful answer than that, really.
Well, I'm gonna move looking towards the future and kind of career developments. A couple of good questions that have come in from the audience, and I think in particular, given that you, as you said, now chair and also now the HR director, what is your diversity and inclusion hiring policy? Do you take extra steps to attract candidates, i.e. more specialist agencies, or address unconscious bias? I think it's obviously particularly relevant given current social context and social change that's desperately needed.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a really thorny issue for us. I think as a practice, because we are fairly well-established historic practice with people that stay, like me, I'm afraid, stay for a period of time. There is this question of, we have a structure which is not as diverse. It's not as diverse as we would like it to be. In terms of practices for us to try and encourage that, I mean, we do wherever we can. I think we perceive this as a long-term thing. I'm pretty sure that we can't just suddenly, flick a switch and become a lot more diverse. Concentrating on being as open and as welcoming and visibly so as we can be, I think is an important first step, and so concentrating on how we are perceived as an organization, and maybe dispelling some of the assumptions that there might be about a business of our size and our geographic locations and so on, is an important feature. We do endeavor to overcome bias by anonymizing in recruitment, so that we are just literally looking at the information that we have in terms of the quality of experience and the portfolios of individuals. That helps, but I think it is this question of trying to, as far as possible, make ourselves appear to be as welcoming and open as we can be, whilst trying to also address the sort of longer term thing through, for example, outreach into schools and universities as well.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. And kind of thinking about recruitment, and another question from the audience: what would you suggest for young architects to improve their business acumen?
To improve their business acumen, I think there's possibly something to be said for making sure that you don't get too blinkered within the profession, and to look around and to explore other business organizations, and to understand, to be open to the idea of how other parts, not only of the construction industry, but actually how other parts of business operate, and consciously go and do that. I mean, this is something that, I mean, it is great to have such a focus and such a strong message that the architectural profession does, but equally, it is valuable to go and see how other bits of business do things. So I'm guessing perhaps keep an eye open and for other opportunities as well as those in architecture.
So interestingly, again, a question here from Dorota Adamczyk, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name. But a good question is thinking about opportunities. You've mentioned COVID incentivizing further digital development, but also presented a very relevant example of adapting unit for the Nightingale Hospital through collaborative design. What future opportunities is the practice looking at working towards in terms of BIM and digital design that further engages collaborative work?
Okay, look, the first thing I should say here is that having been chairman for 8 years and HR director for a while, I am not the best person to ask about aspects of BIM and digital collaboration, but in terms of that specific question, and I don't know whether this is sort of dodging it, but actually I think it feels to me like the technical solutions in terms of digital manipulation of information and so on is a tool, but it only is as good as the individuals, the humans operating it that work together. And so actually, in terms of an investment, we have recently employed for the first time somebody who was actually a design director at Kia, as he speaks fluent contractor, and we felt we need a translator. We need somebody who can help make sure that these connections are made, and actually too much reliance perhaps on the digital connections means that we forget the human element of actually working together and understanding one another, and getting a feel for why somebody's taken a position in a certain area, and seeing whether there's an alternative route that can be made. So there is very definitely, I believe, a human element to this as well as the technological one. And I would have to, I'm afraid, leave somebody else to look at the technological answer.
That's all right. You mentioned there people having points of view, and actually a question from the audience as well, that kind of relating us to specific points of view. Are your thinking resources that are available to download on your website, are they driven internally to create Treglown's stance on topics like healthcare and schools, etc.?
I think they are there to stimulate thought and debate. Yes, I mean, you know, people are very welcome to connect into those and join them and throw darts at them and see what people think. You know, it is just an opportunity for individuals in our practice to be able to obviously project thought and to do it in a kind of, you know, a way that can spawn all kinds of different thoughts and experience. So we do welcome, obviously we welcome interaction and thought and of those things. It's a rich vein of exchanging thoughts and experience that quickly develops a life of its own, and it can go in all kinds of unexpected areas, which I think is really exciting, actually. Yeah, and unexpected things pop up, and then you think, well, actually, maybe there's an opportunity here for us to think in a different way, or to, you know, provide a different level of expertise in a certain thing.
We're almost out of time, so just thinking about sort of unexpected things, and I'm going to have one final question. You mentioned that you built the house for your mother.
Yeah.
What one thing perhaps did you learn? What was the most important thing you learned from that yourself that was unexpected, or something that you've really taken through your career?
Oh gosh. So this house, it's at the bottom of a hill, and you could only get to it. So the site was a mill on a stream, and you could only get to it down a very steep road. Well, we had to make the road first, and then there were just three of us, and there was a whole load of materials were being delivered at the top of the site, and you had to get down to the bottom of the site, and then you had to lift all of that stuff up, scaffolding, to put it in to make the house. And so Jeff, the builder, said, well, let's actually construct a bridge out at a particular level. So rather than taking all the stuff down to the bottom and then back up to the top, we'll just carry it across the bridge. Now that, to my mind, that sort of level of thinking, you know, that sort of, let's work out what's the easiest way of doing this. That sort of constructive thinking, to my mind, is really, really valuable. And as designers, if we're thinking about the principles of how stuff goes together, what the logistics are of actually making something, make it easier so that it goes together better, or it expends less energy doing it, or whatever it might be. I guess, you know, that's probably one of the most useful things, I think. That kind of thing, that way of thinking, which actually can influence the way that you go about designing stuff potentially.
David, that's great. Thank you very much. Well, I mean, that really, we are bang on 6 o'clock. So firstly, David, thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts, answering the questions. Thank you to the audience and everyone who's attended for your questions as well. Very, very helpful, and helps to keep the conversation going, and very insightful. And obviously, of course, thank you to Birmingham Architecture Association. Thank you to the sponsors as well. Without you, this just simply isn't possible. And do watch out, keep an eye on us on social media for other events from the Birmingham Architecture Association, other events from the RIBA in the region as well. Do please attend. Some great stuff out there. So David, thank you, and thank you everyone else for joining. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.